Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Gaming in the Keats. I am your host, Chate, and I'm bringing you round 6 of the Berlin Liga. I am up against a tough opponent today. It is Batrep from the French ETC team. So, this is going to be a really tough one, I'm not going to lie, but I will give it my damnedest. On to my list. So I'm actually running the same list as before in the last battle report for the Berlin League of 5. So it's basically just 3 scoring units, big blocky units with AP2, with the Myrmidons, the Hoarders with the Mirrored Scales, which is great, the Bloatflies with Digestive Vomit, which I think is okay, but this was the cheaper option because I think I really wanted Unhinging Jaw for this matchup. But oh well. And then 2 units of Chaff for the Furies, and then I have 2 Greater Demons and a lot of spells. So I'm excited to see how this gets on. On to my opponent's list. So they're running 3 Mammoth Hunters and a Shaman, 2 Untuskers and 1 on foot. So he's got 2 Shaman or 2 Mammoth Hunter Cowboys. So we've got a 2-up, 4-up, and then another 2-up, 5-up. And that's annoying. And then I really like this Alchemist Alloy combo with Heart Ripper because he's always hitting on 3s anyway, like at worst. So that's great. So Shamanism, yay. Scraplings, lots of Scraplings, 2 units of Tridesmen. So the big unit of 5 is his bunker. Then he has a nice little scoring dart. He has 1 little Chaff Tiger. The big Tusker unit with the banner that lets them reroll 1s for hits, wounds, and armor saves. And then a unit of 5 Yetis and a unit of 2 Yetis, which I think is interesting here. He has the 5 Sabertooth Tigers, and then he has the single Chaff Sabertooth Tiger. And then to round it out, he's got 2 Giants, 1 with an Iron Fist and 1 with a Great Weapon. I really like those are both really solid options, I think, for Ogres. Like, the Ogre Giants are just great. Like, the one with the Great Weapons, like, I'm going to charge in and do impact hits, and then you hit me, and I get a whole bunch of attacks at strength 7, AP 4, and then the other one is the one with parry and has maximized Thunderstomp. So each Giant sort of has its own specific role, and yeah, I just really like that versatility. So, on to deployment and all the pregame settings. We got Counter Thrust, Map A6, that's pretty, I think it's a pretty cool map. And then you got King of the Hill. So, my opponent won the roll to choose sides. So they gave me this side up at the top with the impassable, and my thinking there was like that was pretty expected, and then my goal is to simply pick this hill or this wall here to try and defend, because it has a nice little sort of refused flank option here where I can sort of swing around. And basically hold it with the Hoarders. That was my plan. And then I'm assuming my opponent is going to choose the water feature because I only have 3 scoring units anyway. It's going to be tough for me to get there, but we'll see what happens. So, and that also means because I was given this side, that means I drop for the first drop. For magic, I chose on the Miser the Hereditary, Whispers of the Veil, Spectral Blades, and Touch of the Reaper. And then for the courtesan, I chose the hereditary, Fate's Judgment, Stars Align, and Unerring Strike. So I'm basically saying I'm going to overload and spam my damage spells and try and pick off those hunters and the cowboys and perhaps the giants. And, I only have 3 combat spells effectively. So if I get into combat, which I will, because he's ogres, he's going to be coming at me, I'll at least have 3 spells to throw into a combat. So that was my thinking there at the time. For my opponent had the hereditary naturally, has Awaken the Beast, Swarm of Insects, Totemic Summon, and Break the Spirit. A part of me was a little surprised by taking Totemic Summon. However, it's still a great spell, and I think that my opponent was able to use it, which you'll see in the game, quite effectively. But I was actually expecting Chilling Howl to make it so my range spells were -1 to wound as well. So that's what I was expecting, but my opponent chose the Totemic Summon instead. My thoughts on the game are as follows. I'm trying to divide it up into 2 sort of categories here. The macro, which is the overall picture, and of course the micro, which is the little details and the bits of movement that I can do and utilization of the rules as best as I can. So ideally I want to go second. I want to play compact with my scoring units and my strong combat units. I know that Shamanism isn't a good matchup for me. I have to prioritize Swarm of Insects, which means Breaks the Spirit and Awaken the Beast, and the Hereditary can go off, and that's essentially like a nice little redundant compounding effect for a -1 to wound for me. I'm going to pick a hill, or in this case the wall in my deployment zone that's theoretically easy to defend, and essentially say I'm going to tie the objective and go for points. And hopefully I can get a small win out of this. With the micro stuff, it's just always trying to make sure I'm chaffing things properly, not allowing overruns. With the Furies, for example, making sure I'm leaving lanes for the big demons to charge if they're supporting the infantry units. I need to avoid the single models trying to get in behind and get out of my line of sight, such as the giants and the hunter, like being careful of that vanguard. What I can also do is use the miser to just block up the tuskers or block up certain charges and just say, you're going to run into the miser and not go anywhere because of my resilience 7. But we'll see how that goes. I think it's an unstable matchup for me because my opponent has more units than I do, more scoring units than I do, and can probably take the objective from me as well. Or it has more potential to take the objective from me if I let it happen, essentially. But and then of course you also have to take into account that this is a much more experienced and skilled player than I am, and therefore I'm automatically just ticking it down a notch and making it an orange matchup. But we'll see how I get on. Right. So when it came to counter thrust, I knew where the hoarders were going to go no matter what. So I dropped the hoarders here, right in front of the wall. Then my opponent dropped a unit of 2 Yetis, and then I dropped my second unit of the big unit of Myrmidons, so the 24 here. My opponent then dropped perhaps his saber-toothed tiger in this area. And then I dropped my unit of Furies behind here. So then my opponent dropped his second unit of Yetis. And then from there, I had dropped my third unit of Myrmidons, expecting my opponent to want to drop for first, which naturally they did. So you can see this little corner. This is the base of the Myrmidons on this side. And then from there, my opponent drops his whole army, and then you can see his vanguards. His Yetis actually have vanguarded back, I believe, or vanguarded back this way. These Yetis have vanguarded up to block me up. This tiger with the hunter has also vanguarded up. And so going from my opponent's left to right, you have the tiger and the hunter. You have the giant with the great weapon, the 4 tuskers, the big brother giant, the BSB tusker right here. You have the scraplings. You have his shamanism bunker, so the 5 tribesmen with his shaman. You also have his general, the little dart of ogres right there. In the back, you got his 5 tigers just being in reserve, and you got the Yetis to try and get around perhaps with their light troops. From my left to right at the moment, you have the courtesan with Murthaida's Shadow Queen holding it down. Then you have Furies right behind my Myrmidons, of course. You have the Miser in the middle. And then you have as I said earlier, the Hoarders in my chaff, and the Myrmidons onto the right side. And then if we go to the next picture, the next picture will also have my bloatflies way out to this side. And the goal here was to make sure that if he vanguarded up 12, his hunter cannot get out of line of sight of either the bloatflies or the courtesan. So if he wants to come into this area, he's going to get charged. Yeah, so that was the thinking at the time in terms of what I could do in terms of deployment and making sure that the single models don't just try and sweep around my left side. Okay, turn 1. Ogre Con movement and magic phase. So he brings his hunter back, he brings his tiger back in reserve because he realizes that, or he knows that he can't just march into this area without getting out of my line of sight, so there's no need to push up. And so he can hide behind the hill here. The giant is now just within 18 inches of the bloatflies to cause a march check. And then he pushes forward and pushes his Yetis right in front of my Myrmidons. And then if we switch over to this side, you can see his Yetis coming over. Here's his champion about to touch the ruins, but not quite yet. His general's holding it down the back. His BSB is here, and everything's kind of coming up. He's not leaving me good charges, or he's leaving me double 6s for the tigers, for the miser, and then he's basically pushing the giant up saying, go ahead, charge the giant with the miser if you want, but you'll be getting countercharged by all of my different units. So don't think that's a good idea. So going into magic, I dispel Swarm of Insects that he put on the courtesan. However, he does get a totemic summon through with a miscast, and his unit takes 2 wounds. So it's miscast 3 on 4 dice. He takes 2 wounds. So at that point, he fires one of his crossbows. It misses the courtesan, and then he hits my Myrmidon unit as well. And I think they actually made their Aegis save. I think maybe I lose 1 from shooting there. Okay, so my turn 1. All right, so I'm choosing to charge the chaff. I want to get rid of it, and it's it's 170 points, and most importantly, the Furies pass their march check. This is pretty crucial, because otherwise I'm having 3 different units come down at me and just wreck my Myrmidons. So it was a 9 with no reroll, and they made it, thank goodness. So the Furies block up his Tuskers and his BSB. His Giant can still charge. But yeah, his Giant's able to charge. I left the charge there for the Giant. As you can see, this is his totemic summon, by the way. I unfortunately fail my March check with the bloatflies. They rolled an 11. And so they just kind of have to chill for the moment. So what I decide to do, I think this is a mistake, honestly, right now, what I've done with the courtesan. But what I've decided to do is pull the courtesan over and try and snipe this hunter here. The reason why I say this is a mistake is because really at the moment, the hunter's not in a position to do any charging or is not a real threat currently. And what I really should have been prioritizing was this big brother giant. So the courtesan really needed to be probably back here, supporting the myrmidons, knowing that the giant's going to be coming in, and really trying to put as many wounds onto the giant as possible. So, yeah, I think this was my first mistake. And I don't push too far forward with the myrmidons. I think I'm leaving him a double 6 with the Yetis here and making sure he can't just march out of my line of sight with light troops. Reason being, if the Yetis charge the myrmidons, they actually go first because of their aura effect, or their chilling, the chilling effect on the Yetis. So I don't feel like having them charge me. The Hoarders push up slightly, still keeping the Yetis in the front. And then I'm keeping my chaff back here to activate it in later turns. I push the miser up slightly aggressively. I'm thinking at the time I had the coverage to see the myrmidons, or to cover the myrmidons for a counter charge, but but when we went to measure it, I actually didn't. I didn't cover it. So that was a mistake on my part as well. But I'm pushing the miser up to just be a pain, essentially, and just saying, like, sure, charge me with your giant, and just do nothing. So for magic, a small Fate's Judgment puts a wound on the hunter. I roll 1 dice to cast a spear onto the hunter as well, and I fail to wound. And then my opponent dispels Touch of the Reaper that I tried to target his shaman from the evocation miser here, and then I put with my second spear, I put 2 wounds onto this big brother giant. So I think I didn't prioritize my targets very well. I really think I should have just focused all my efforts on this giant, or perhaps even just put the Touch of the Reaper on the general. And so I know my opponent's going to dispel it, but at least this way it forces him to, he has to try and dispel it. And if he doesn't, then this general's kind of out of commission at that point, or is not likely going to come into close combat. All right. I think what I should have done really is just done a Stars Align onto the Myrmidons, then try a Spectral Blades onto the Myrmidons, and then just go for an Unerring Strike onto the Giant, assuming that the Courtesan was in range. Because now I know that the Myrmidons are essentially, they have an open charge here, and the Totemic can also possibly come in as well, and that's not cool. All right, and this is how I reform to get rid of the Yetis. Okay, the giant comes in, but the Totemic Summon needed an 8 to get in and rolled a 7 on 3 dice, so I got a bit lucky there. With my opponent's movement, my opponent brings up the unit of 5 tigers and chaffs both the miser and my hoarders. He gave my hoarders a flank, but he gave the miser a front. And then the BSB actually charges the furies up top. The tuskers just shuffle to the side a bit. And so other than that, there are no other charges. I don't have a picture of my opponent's movement phase, but I'm describing it now for you. Okay, so in my opponent's magic phase, I actually decide to let through Swarm of Insects because I need to stop the spells going on to the Myrmidon combat. And unfortunately, I fail to dispel both Awaken the Beast and the Hereditary on the Giant with a dice advantage. Not only that, my opponent, just for Salt in the Wound, is able to get a Totemic Summon off. So my opponent had a big magic phase this time, but I also had opportunities to try and dispel spells, and I failed the ones that I really wanted. So this is not looking good for that Myrmidon unit. And the Tusker BSB gets rid of the Furies. However, the Furies do put a wound on the BSB, so that's pretty cheeky. Okay, 3 wounds to go. I'll take it. However, in other news, the Myrmidons lose 7 with the maximized stomp and everything. I do put, it looks like 2 wounds onto the Giant, but oof. That did not go well. I do pass my steadfast check at the moment, so the Myrmidon unit is in trouble. Alright, so with my movement, as you can see in my opponent's previous turn, he pulled the Hunter back, and he pulled the Giant just to be within 18 of the Bloatflies, and of course they fail their march. So the Bloatflies fail their march again. Luckily, the Courtesan passes her march, so she marches in this nice little sweet spot where the Tuskers cannot see her from the hill. The Giant can't see her, and now she's ready for countercharging the Big Brother Giant or countercharging the BSB. And yeah, she's there also to see off that Totemic Summon, potentially. On my right side, I make another mistake, and you'll see why it's a mistake in later slides. So I charge the Miser into the dogs, trying to cause a terror check, but of course he has a 9 rerollable because his general's within 12, and his BSB is within 18, so I think this was the wrong call here, first of all, for that reason. But I charge the Miser in, and then the Hoarders just shuffle over to the side to keep things in their front arc, and to just own the wall, essentially. The Myrmidons come up, still making sure that the Yetis can't just go 14 out of their arc, but maybe countercharging if something wants to come in to the Hoarders, which I doubt, but just giving myself that option. At this point, I'm going to charge to the ruins. I don't care. Unless there's a break the spirit off, but otherwise I'm just going to do it. So with magic, I actually fail to get a Fate's Judgment on the Totemic Summon. I fail to cast it. And then my opponent easily stops Spectral Blades on the Myrmidons. And yeah, that's that is not looking good. I think I have here, this may be the turn that I get an unerring strike off onto the BSB and cause 2 more wounds to him. But that also could be a later turn. Not 100% sure. I think it is this turn. In combat, yeah. Oh, gross. I put 1 more wound onto the Giant, but yep, the Giant goes to town, kills 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more, and then I fail my steadfast, and I crumble by 1 due to the Greater Dominion rule, so I still had a rank, so that was nice. Yeah, that was not cool. And then, no! Frickin' Miser. So the Miser kills all but 1 tiger. And I roll my restrain check, and I fail the restrain. Not only do I fail the restrain check, but I roll an 11 to overrun and pursue. Yeah. And so I catch the dog, of course, but look where that puts me. It gives the scraplings my flank, everything else in the front with his general and his bunker unit. And oh boy, this is gonna hurt. And sure enough, he brings everything in here. It doesn't matter if he's not doing any wounds to the miser. At this rate, he has so much combat res that I think I very much am likely to just crumble. So, in other news, I don't have a picture of my opponent's movement phase again. Apologies. But the Tuskers and the BSB Tusker charge the Myrmidons because the Giant's still there. My opponent is able to simply just clip both corners, and so gets 2d3 impact hits on the Myrmidons as well. But yeah. Not looking good. In Magic, my opponent gets the hereditary off of his general, and I dispel awaken the beast. And all of that being said, boop. The Myrmidons pop. The Miser pops. Okay. Yeah, so the Myrmidons put one more wound onto the BSB. So actually, I might have done a single wound with an unerring strike onto the BSB instead of two. So now the BSB only has one wound left. And yeah, I put another wound onto the Giant as well. But that's about it. So I do apologize. I actually can't remember if it was... I think maybe the Myrmidons actually did the two wounds and an unerring strike did nothing to the BSB. I couldn't remember in the previous turn. But regardless, the BSB has 3 wounds and 1 wound remaining. And now I have Tuskers looking down the courtesan. And yeah. Let's see if I end up charging. All right. So, yes, as you can see, my opponent also brought their Yetis up in front of the Myrmidons, and now I'm choosing to charge them. Here's the second totemic summon that came on from previous turn and moved up. So now I'm bringing the Furies. They failed their march check and are chaffing the totemic summon as best as I can from a failed march check. And here's something controversial. I don't know. What would y'all have done? Would you have charged the Tuskers, knowing that the Hunter would have had a counter charge here? Or what I chose to do, again, I failed my march check. However, the courtesan with 9 inches still had enough room to get out of line of sight and do a pivot. And so now I've put her slightly on top of the hill. I'm out of line of sight of this Hunter. I'm out of line of sight of the Tuskers. The Giant can see me, and this Giant can also see me because he turned the Giant around. But my goal is to magic off the Tusker BSB and cause panics. And if that happens, okay, we got an 8 and an 8. Or I think this Giant might be leadership 7. Either way, it's either an 8 or a 7. Both of these have a decent chance of failing a panic check with these 2 leadership checks. So that is my plan here. In other news, guess what? The Bloatflies failed their 3rd march check. So I don't give this Giant a charge. Like a possible charge, but the Tuskers now have a double 6 if they want to come charging into the Bloatflies. So this is the 3rd test I failed with the Bloatflies march check. Yes, so going over to the magic phase. All right, so an unerring strike takes off the final wound of the BSB. My opponent rolls their panic checks, and both the giant and the tuskers pass. Oh, crap. Okay. All is not lost. So, then I try a Fate's Judgment on the giant, and my opponent dispels it. And then I fail a spear to try and get the final 2 wounds on this giant. So now, that means I have 2 angry giants who are probably going to be charging the courtesan right now. In other news, the Myrmidons kill all but the champion, and the champion runs through. He takes a DT for his troubles. And I passed my restrain test this time. So, yay. That's a minor victory. And here you have it. You have the Big Brother giant coming in, and you have the Great Weapon giant coming into the courtesan. So this is going to hurt. Yeah. So you essentially have, also just to keep in mind, this tiger took a DT when it came through the water at one point. So yay, again, it's the small victories. But don't give up. And then my opponent brings the small ogre dart in to start to pressure my objective. And this is just an overshot of the board. This hunter comes over here wanting to throw a spear at the bloatflies. The tuskers are giving me a long charge here. The Yeti continues to run, doesn't rally on half leadership. I'm hoping that he runs off the board. That would be fantastic. And my opponent brings his general over here. And then what you see here is with magic, I let the hereditary go off on the giant. I let Awaken the Beast off on my opponent's general because I'm saving my dice to stop Break the Spirit. And I have 5 dice to 3. My opponent rolls a high roll on those 3 dice. And sure enough, I fail to dispel with 5 dice, Break the Spirit on the Myrmidons. Oh, crap. So now the Myrmidons are going to take 2 sets of DTs if they hit the general. I mean, well, oh gosh, it'd just be so gross, the amount of DTs I'd have to take if I charged his general's unit. And then, of course, in others news, the Totemic Summon ran into the Furies, and my opponent did it in a way where he could clip the rear, which I guess I could have just double-checked this chaff maneuver to make sure that my opponent couldn't have done this, and now if he gets a long overrun, he can actually overrun into the hoarders and chaff the hoarders. So, yeah, that's not great. In close combat. Okay. So the courtesan takes a wound. So now the courtesan has 3 wounds. And I do nothing in return to this giant. I put all of my attacks onto this giant here and do nothing. The courtesan took a wound, I think from the Great Weapon giant, because the other 2 giants, they don't do anything aside from this 1 wound. And so that means I am down by 5. And I roll my minimized leadership check because I had minimized up earlier for the attribute of divination. And I roll the 4. Oh my god. Oh, this game is stressful. I roll the 4 on minimized leadership check. And the courtesan sticks. Now, I guess something to note for me is that because the courtesan, there's no way I can turn back around, like I can't do a 180, at least to my knowledge of the rules. So I can't reform or do anything. So it's really, I have to kill this giant to at least mitigate that. To mitigate, to mitigate the combat res coming back onto me. And in other news, the totem kills the Furies, and guess what? Rolls high enough to get into the Hoarders. I think it needed a 12. Or probably a little bit less, but whatever it rolled in what it needed. So now it's chaffing my Hoarders. Ugh. Okay, so Demon Legion's turn 4. So, finally, the flies passed their march check. And it was, I think at this rate, it was either this turn or next turn, where I actually remembered that these flies have a musician on them. So all these previous turns, I was taking leadership checks thinking that was a -1 to my discipline, but I wasn't. But it really didn't make any difference because I was rolling like 11s and 12s for my leaderships anyway, so it really didn't make a difference. So yeah, the flies dance around the hunter, and I'm setting myself up so that if everything goes well, I can actually charge the rear of this giant here. And as you can see in the next picture off to the right, I force through Stars Align with 5 dice. I force through Stars Align. My opponent fails to dispel it. I know it's risky. I know I could miscast, but I just need to give myself a chance. And I get Stars Align and the minimized discipline here on the courtesan, and I kill the big brother giant. And not only that, I make my leadership check and turn around. And the Great Weapon Giant doesn't do anything to the courtesan because he's hitting me on 6s. So I'm able to turn around. Okay. The courtesan is still in okay shape. So, yeah. I'm hanging in there. All right. So, in Ogre Khan's turn 5, this Yeti rallies. That's annoying. Furthermore, the Ogre Dart comes up and sticks on my objective. So, all right, now I have to deal with that. The Tusker is able to simply move out of line of sight from the Myrmidons and try and shoot a crossbow into them. And, the Mage Bunker backs up, doesn't give me a charge, and is also able to get within 18 inches of the Great Weapon Giant. This Totemic Summon moves over this way to try and hit the courtesan, and also the Tuskers reform to give themselves a charge lane in case this combat sticks around for any longer. The Tiger with 1 wound left comes over and is getting ready to chaff something in case it needs to, get in the way. So, in Magic, I let go the Hereditary on the Giant. I stop Awaken the Beast. And then my opponent gets Break the Spirit on the courtesan. So, That being said, the courtesan puts 3 wounds on the giant. And then the giant goes back to hit and whiffs. Doesn't do a single wound. So I win by 3. The giant breaks. And I make my minimized leadership test to restrain. So the courtesan actually restrain. And this is my opponent's turn. So I have some choices to make now. And the giant runs 3 inches. So now I could charge the giant if I wanted to with the bloatflies. Now, this is a picture of both my turn 5 and my opponent's turn 6. On my turn 5, I choose to not charge. I didn't want to take multiple DTs on the courtesan and really just focus on doing the damage spells. So, I moved out of line of sight of the Tuskers. I had the movement to be able to do that, and so I was able to do so. The bloat flies past their march check and move this way. I'm not choosing to charge this giant because it was already fleeing, and just push him back into the center, and I'd fail charge. So instead, I'm just waiting for the giant at this point to rally. And then I don't charge the scraplings. Instead, for whatever reason, I mean, I had my reasonings, but this is just they're not good reasonings. I reform the hoarders. Instead of charging the scraplings, I reform the hoarders like this, thinking that if he charges in, I might win the combat, I might break him somehow, and then somehow overrun into his ogres, and maybe I'm able to get 2 units for my hoarders, just, yeah. That was the idea. It's not a good idea, but I thought I'd try. In the magic phase, Unerring Strike only does 1 wound to the totemic summon. It's still alive. Ugh. So, my opponent stops Fate's Judgment on the totemic summon, and so then I throw a spear at it and kill it. It panics the dog. The tiger runs through the courtesan, because the hoarders are actually closer to the tiger than the courtesan is, and dies. However, the tuskers make their panic check again. Ah! And so, in my opponent's turn, as you can see also, he brought his Yeti up to chaff my Myrmidons. So I can't just charge the flank of his general. So my opponent's turn, he brings his hunter to shoot at the courtesan. He brings his hunter on a tusker, his general, to shoot at the courtesan. He brings his shaman over to try and swarm of insects, the courtesan. Basically, the focus is on the courtesan. Oh my goodness. And his magic phase goes. And so, by the way, the giant rallies. FYI. So, on my opponent's turn, he charges his scraplings in. I let off Awaken the Beast and the Hereditary on the scraplings. I don't care. I just need to stop Swarm of Insects. I roll a dice, and I stop it. I'm able to stop a Swarm of Insects. However, it's not over yet, because now we have the shooting phase. So, my opponent rolls to hit with his crossbow. Here's his to hit rolls the 5. And here's his to wound roll. It's a 5. And I fail my Aegis save. So this is a 3 marker, by the way, and these are 2 1 markers. So my courtesan has 1 wound left. So now my opponent's getting half points. And then the hunter is about to throw his spear. He throws it, and he misses! Oh my god! The hunter misses with his spear. This game is nuts. So the courtesan has 1 wound remaining. Oh my god. What is this game? So, the scraplings actually win combat because they're beefed up beyond belief, and I actually crumble, so I lose 1 of my hoarders. And then that being said, I fail my reform test, so I can't bring them over. And yeah, and I'm stuck like this in this position. And like, again, I guess my thinking was I would block the scraplings from getting over as well, and maybe if they broke, I'd overrun, blah, blah, blah. But in all honesty, even if these ogres were dead, say, for example, I panicked them off, the scraplings can still reform. I mean, they have to test if I win the combat, but they'd have to test and just reform like so, which they were likely going to do because of my ridiculous shenanigans of a reform I did. Yeah, so this was just really poor micro on my part. So it's my turn 6. I'm saying, screw it. Myrmidons are charging this Yeti. I need to get points. I'm stuck here with the Hoarders. And I pass my march check. And I'm able to move in a way where I can see both the Hunter and both... both the Hunter and both the Tuskers. You could argue, see, this is another thing. You could argue that instead of focusing here, I could focus on just trying to kill this scoring dart. But my thinking was I wasn't actually at this rate likely to win this combat, and my opponent would have just reformed anyway. So that's my thinking there of like why I just ignored this dart, and he would have still have gotten the objective. So instead, I'm just trying to get points to where I can. So the flies make their charge, thank goodness. It wasn't long, but they, still needed to roll. And so now here we go, magic phase. And I get Stars Align off onto the bloat flies. And then I get a Fate's Judgment, and it kills the Hunter. My opponent fails the armor saves. My opponent stops the Unerring Strike, but the Fate's Judgment is the one that kills him. So, okay, so I got the Hunter. And going into combat, I kill the Yeti. I kill the Giant. Okay, so now it's up to the Hoarders to see if they can do something miraculous. And boom, I win the combat. My opponent fails his 8 re-rollable because of the Scraplings rule with the Tusker here, and runs. And I run the unit down. Now, unfortunately, or fortunate to my opponent, unfortunate for me, the Scraplings are insignificant to the Ogres here. So it doesn't cause us a panic, and even though I overrun into them, it's 1 turn too late. So I still get the points for the Scraplings, but my opponent has the objective, which means it is a 12-8 victory for the Ogre Khans. Oh, this was a stressful game, especially after losing the Miser. Oh my goodness, that was ridiculous. So you can see I lost the Miser. My opponent got half points for the Courtesan, took the big unit of 24 Myrmidons and both my pieces of chaff. However, if you take a look at it, when we start adding up the points, I ended up getting more points than my opponent. I took his BSB, I took the Hunter on foot, I took the Scraplings, both units of Yetis, both units of Tigers, even though these are fairly cheap, and both Giants. So, all that being said, it was an 11-9 to the Demons, but because my opponent had the objective, it became a 12-8 victory for the Ogre Khans. Okay, Afterthoughts. I'm not gonna lie, I don't feel like I played this game particularly well. I felt like I made quite a lot of mistakes, both in the macro and the micro sense of this, but I still had fun. And I think the overall thought here is really just don't give up. Even if you lose your big, nasty, expensive greater demon general who's half of your magic and a big issue for your opponent, you don't give up. You can still get points. You can still try and pull things back. On the macro, okay, my opponent and I talked about it, and really the move for me is to just go first. And I feel like I make this mistake with Ogre Khans anyway, because the Ogre Khans, they're just going to rush you regardless. Most of these lists are going to rush you unless it's a big Ogre gun line, but like, if that's the case, knowing that they're going to rush you, I might as well take board position and board control so that there's less room for my opponent to maneuver and to just Vanguard up and use their chaff. So I guess that's the thinking there. I wanted to go second because I wanted to be able to have the last turn to get points and potentially, if something was crazy, get onto the objective. But as you can see, that wasn't the case. I got the points, but not the objective. I think I needed a different spell selection. Hasten the Hour, I didn't realize it at the time, but I guess with Hasten the Hour, it's still fairly effective against ogres and those ogre characters because, you're putting in a wound every time, and then that makes Touch of the Reaper that much more potent. instead of the spear, I was thinking, the spear's multi-wounds too, and there's a lot of multi-wounds here, but you still have to roll to wound for the spear. And I was failing to wound it. So, yeah, which happens sometimes, If I plan to castle, as I did, I'm thinking I just need to put the Myrmidons and the Hoarders, and then basically have the Hoarders in the center, still planning on perhaps taking that hill, but then having the Hoarders just be flanked by the 2 units of Myrmidons, so both units are supported, and then have the 2 greater demons kind of control the center on the other side. And then the question was, putting the bloatflies on the far side to give my opponents something to think about, so they couldn't just march out of my line of sight and advance up, but with that giant controlling my movement in the march checks, it ended up being a moot point. Like, the bloatflies were out of the game most of the game. So, and then the courtesan, I messed up on my priorities. I really should have been focusing on what was the bigger threat, what was the most immediate threat. And in this case, the turn 1 was the giant. So therefore, the courtesan needed to be closer to the Myrmidons and ready for a counter charge instead. I made a lot of micro mistakes too. The reform with the Hoarders at the end, that was ridiculous. I had my thought process, but I think I got lucky with that scrappling reroll. I think I would have actually had a better chance had I just charged in with my ranks and getting all of my attacks. So, I should have charged the Hoarders to clear the Tigers instead of the Miser, so I wouldn't have even had to roll for the Miser's restrain test. I could have used the Miser then, if it passed the march check, of course, to block the giant and still keep everything else in the front arc. So perhaps the Myrmidons wouldn't have even had a charge from the big brother giant. Making sure to really check the Fury's position on when I use them to chaff random movement, like just making sure, understanding how my opponent can maximize with random movement, and that was tricky. And then, I let those 2 giants charge the courtesan. My thinking, of course, was I was hopefully going to kill the BSB and the giant with all the magic I had, but it didn't happen, and so that was pretty risky. It ended up paying off in my favor, but that was still a risk that perhaps was unnecessary, or perhaps there was a better way of doing that maneuver. So, with that being said, thank you so much, Borcha, for the game. It was a great learning experience, and I really enjoyed playing my opponent. That was just a lot of fun, and it was a stressful game. Oh my god. Like, we had both thought he had won it once the Miser died, but it just goes to show you, don't give up. You can still claw your way back and still get points, even though I'd lost the objective. Like, I think for me, this was just a moral victory, because I really didn't expect to do too well anyway, but I'm happy with the end result overall. It was a fun game. Thank you again, Borcha, and thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe if you're feeling spicy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Ciao, ciao for now.